Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod with Jared Bradley with us today, the DNA guy. He helps investigators solve crime using the M-Vac wet vacuum forensic DNA collection system. So he's a forensic DNA collection expert, CSI type of guy. He's the host of All Things Crime video podcast, small business owner, and has a nice military background. Worked for Pfizer as well for 7 years. So we're going to talk about that today. Jared, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and about what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I was born and raised in Idaho, which is a state most people can't spot on the map, but we love it out there. It's just small town America. My dad had a small business growing up, and we always, as a family, worked with him, and so that was kind of my upbringing. And so being involved with small business was always kind of my goal. And even though after college I went into the military and thought maybe that would be my career eventually, I kind of got tired of the bureaucracy and just kind of the problems within not necessarily the military, but just how slow everything moved. And I was like, you know what, I can utilize my my leadership and my just wanting to get up and get going type of atmosphere a little better. And so I got out of active duty. I stayed in the reserves for a long time, but when I left that, I went into sales and eventually landed with Pfizer. That's kind of a bad word to some people nowadays, but it was a great experience. I had a lot of fun interacting with doctors and helping patients and, just trying to make a difference. And that ultimately it came down to, I really wanted to make sure that whatever I was doing, I was not only productive for my family, but I was also, it meant something. It was actually going to make a difference to other people's lives. And I just kind of, as things progressed, I either had the choice of going into management or, but I finally got frustrated enough that I was venting to my dad. And you have to understand, my dad grew up on a ranch in Idaho. And so, he was the type that would get up at 4 a.m. to go milk cows before he got on the school bus, and slept in just a tiny little two bedroom home. And you don't complain to people like that, and it's not received very well. And so but I was complaining to my dad one day, and he basically said, well, if you want to do something else, then come work for me. And so that's how I ended up with M-Vac systems. And initially we were focused on helping the food industry to, and that's what my dad originally developed the M-Vac for, was to collect E. coli and salmonella and stuff like that off of food surfaces. And just so everybody can understand, the M-Vac, it's basically like a medical grade carpet cleaner. It sprays a solution down onto a surface and then vacuums up whatever is on there. And so it doesn't matter if it's anthrax or E. coli or a skin cell, it pulls it up just the same way that like a carpet cleaner would. So we originally launched the system in the food industry, and then over time, well, unfortunately, my father passed away from a brain tumor. But then we realized that the food industry just wasn't ever going to use it. And so in the process of looking for new markets and realizing that we had to find a new market, forensics kind of came into vision, and we pivoted into forensics in 2012, and that's where we've been ever since. So helping solve crime. That's what we're all about.
Pretty cool career. You started, well, in the Army. You were a captain. You were nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare expert and a ranger. You studied at Brigham Young University. in zoology, Japanese, and military science. So you probably studied unit 731, which um, was probably the most disgusting thing I studied last year on Wikipedia, which was this Japanese lab developing biological and chemical warfare instruments. There's been other countries, and these were Second World War time. They even dropped fleas with bubonic plague in California. Most people don't know that, or were planning to do so, and were stopped during the Second World War. There's also been a bunch of other countries, such as Iran, that have been developing these kinds of weapons. So, would love to talk about chemical warfare and biological warfare. We've seen that great movie that was produced by Obama. Forgot his name. Julia Roberts was an actress in there, and it's like the end of the world. Um, and yeah, there's all these ticks, that are infected with all kinds of disease, including Lyme and so forth. So it seems that biological warfare is still an option nowadays for some countries. What is the state of things regarding biological and uh, chemical warfare nowadays? Where is it used in the world? Why is it still an efficient weapon to achieve your means? And what should we expect in our modern times?
What should we expect? That's a great question. There's probably a lot of guys a lot smarter than me, focused on that. But the interesting thing is all the time that I was learning about bio and chemical weapons is it's called the poor man's nuke. And those countries that want to create a lot of damage, but don't have the wherewithal really to develop their own nuclear weapon, then the biological and the chemical routes are really good options for them. Because the biggest thing about countries and leaders that are willing to do that kind of thing, because the physical and the emotional and the psychological damage that those kind of weapons create is just absolutely unreal. Yeah, this is taking a little different direction than what I thought, but I'll tell you a little story of actually what happened during the Iran-Iraq war. They, that war lasted 8 years, and on the border there was a kind of a swampland that in between Iraq and Iran, in between the lines at least. And my understanding is the Iranians basically took a bunch of mustard agent, and mustard is really damaging, especially to the skin. I mean, if you breathe it in, then it's literally like, inhaling a bunch of mustard, and how that would burn, but it burns the skin. And they combined it with another chemical that would make it sink. So they sprayed it all over this swampland, and then it sunk down to the ground. It was down into the silt, the bottom of the swamp. So then as the Iraqi troops were crossing this swampland, they stirred it all up. So they didn't even realize that, excuse me, they didn't even realize that they were literally marching through this mustard agent. And by the time they got to the other side, they were so burned up that, a lot of those soldiers died. But the pain and the suffering that agent creates, and just the way that it's deployed, these guys that are willing to do that have to have a pretty serious dimension about them that just to me it's almost inhuman to treat other people that way. So and then that's what chemicals will do to you. And I've gone through the nerve agent training center with the Army a number of times, and it's scary just knowing that you're in there with nerve agent. If you ever watch what actually happens when you spray a spider or something with bug spray, imagine 1,000 times stronger, and that's what nerve agent will do to a human. But it's it's just nasty, nasty stuff. And which is why most countries have banned it, chemical and biological warfare. It's so inhumane that most of the Western countries, for sure, they don't use it anymore. And I know the U.S. is basically getting rid of their stockpiles. So, yeah, but biological weapons, even if you think about what COVID did, and COVID was gain of function research, and that, think about what that did to the world. It basically shut the world down. But COVID's like the flu. It's not even a really damaging biological weapon. And so you get something that actually has a mortality rate that is even in the 5 to 10% range, and you're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions, dead. Literally people laying in the street. And that's COVID was nothing. So the stuff that they're cooking up in some of these labs around the world, personally, I think is just evil. So hopefully we never run into that. But I'll tell you, anybody that's participating in gain of function research, I can't tell you on air what I would do with them, but it wouldn't. I would just get rid of them. Those people don't.
Wuhan, like, was it? Were they researching that for biological weapon, or were they just researching it to prevent bad stuff from happening to people?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's much use for virology labs like that. It's they can claim whatever they want, but when you're taking something that occurs naturally and altering it, I don't see any benefit to human. For me, there's just no reason to do it. I think you're taking something that God has created, and you're trying to perfect that, and to make it more dangerous to humans. What's the point of doing that if it's not evil? So
Right. I
yeah.
would agree with that. Then you work at Pfizer for 7 years.
Mhm.
Pfizer made a fortune during COVID, and you started the convo like saying, "Oh, Pfizer doesn't have the best of rap nowadays." What do you think what they did during COVID was mostly good for the world?
Uh, I don't know. They sure made a lot of money, and they were sure positioned well for uh supposed, this pandemic that was just sprung on them. And so to me, it just doesn't make sense that they've got multiple cures for problems that don't exist. So it's almost like gain of function. There's, to me, why are you doing that? Why do you have this cure that you're able to develop so fast? I don't know. I mean, yeah, that's kind of an area we don't.
Or at the right place at the right time, who knows? Because
Yeah.
they have labs, and they have like these humongous research machine going on, and there's been a bunch of startups that have tried to accelerate that research. But yeah, it's almost a pointless debate, because there's so much opinions, and people like sort of get enraged when you talk about that because it's related to their health. What we can deduce though is that, yeah, COVID caused massive chaos, and like you said, there's not much chaos that's needed to this world to pretty much bring everything to a halt. There's been millions of people that have suffered adversely from COVID. There's also been tens of thousands that have gone super rich, so inequality keeps on spreading itself slowly but surely. Now, I want to talk about your business, which is equally as interesting as what we just talked about, M-Vac. You help solve crime, giving people the latest technology to solve these investigations. So tell us about the business, what you do, who you target, and what product do you give out to people?
Okay. Yeah, the M-Vac, like I said, it's like a medical grade carpet cleaner. One of the biggest problems with crime is when the detectives and the CSIs and everybody is trying to solve it, especially with what's called touch DNA, which is basically whenever you grab onto something, you're leaving skin cells, or you brush up against something, you're leaving skin cells. Well, it doesn't matter what kind of luminescence they try to use, like blue star or anything like that. They can't see it. So, blood and saliva, semen, those kind of things will luminesce based on what you spray on it and what kind of light you shine on it. Well, skin cells, they won't. So not every crime. You may find a lot of victim blood, but you may not be able to find anything really from the perpetrator, with the exception that more than likely there are skin cells there. And skin cells, again, are the hardest to find. So in order to collect those, the other collection methods are basically like a Q-tip. It's called a swab. And there's other things that they can do, but most of the time they have to have some kind of a biofluid. Well, when you're collecting skin cells, if you don't have the ability to collect a wider and a deep, you'd be able to go wider and deeper. So imagine just kind of an analogy that I like to use. So if you spill some wine on your carpet, or wine on your couch or something, you have a couple of options to clean that up. You can grab a towel, you can grab a broom, like a little hand broom, or if you really want to get down into the fibers and really get that stain up, you have to use like a carpet cleaner. And so the M-Vac is equivalent to that carpet cleaner. And that's so back to the skin cells, like say, somebody has grabbed your shoulder like this. Well, they've left skin cells all over that shoulder. Well, the swabbing and the other methods really don't have the ability to cover that entire area, whereas the M-Vac can. So we can not only go deeper into the clothing or into whatever surface the investigators are trying to get, collect the DNA from, but they can also cover a larger surface area, so they can go wider and deeper. And that's what's enabled the M-Vac to solve cases that the other methods just couldn't produce any kind of a profile.
Give us some case studies of crimes that you helped solve and, brought justice to what happened.
Well, a really good one was just happened. It was just solved last year. It was a case from 1975. There were two 14-year-old girls down in the kind of Fort Lauderdale area, right along Deerfield Beach, that area. If you're familiar with the East Coast of Florida, these two girls were out hitchhiking. A friend of theirs saw them get into a big white van, and that was the last time they were seen alive. A fisherman and his son were headed out to the coast, and they happened to be driving down this little road, and they found the two girls. They'd been, strangled and raped, and just horrible. They were only 14, which is just, you think about I have two boys that are almost 14, and to think of them losing their lives, especially in such a horrible way, at that age, is just tragic beyond belief. Well, they tried using the traditional methods to collect DNA over the years, and it wasn't until they used the M-Vac last year they actually got some skin cells off of the pockets of the girls' pants. So clearly, whoever killed them had gone through their pockets, probably to see if there was any money or anything like that in there. And but those skin cells, really fortunately, number one, they found the girls. This is in June in Florida, so as hot and as humid as it was. Plus, it was right on the edge of the Everglades. If they had they'd been there any longer, the animals would have got to them. The weather would have increased the decomposition. They would have been in a lot worse shape. But because they were found the next day, they were able to preserve the their the evidence, which is basically their clothing. And here we are, 40 some years later, they were able to use the M-Vac and still get those skin cells off there. So if evidence is found soon enough, so that there's not a lot of decomposition in there, which is all victim DNA, and if it's preserved properly, then that DNA can survive, and it can survive decades. So that's just one case that we were really excited to hear about, how the investigators were able to use our system correctly, and they used it effectively, and they were able to help solve that cold case.
That's fascinating. I'm also seeing like E. coli case on your website. So bioterrorism, I believe it's called, bioterror agents. Tell us about some of these cases, because we also have seen anthrax in the US at some point. Is there still some bioterrorist cases, and how do you help detect those?
No, you know what? That's why we've gone away from that direction, is because it just never really went anywhere, and not necessarily the bioterrorism. I mean, the capability is still there, but our system just isn't used for that anymore. Well, it never was, and that's one of the biggest problems. It's the capability is there, but bioterrorism cases are so they're especially in the U.S. I think our law enforcement are good enough to, they find those type of terrorist types way before they're able to actually deploy the weapons. And so, no, we like I said, we pivoted into forensics in 2012, and that's where we've been ever since. So just solving homicides and rapes and assaults, those kind of things are what we've been doing for the last 10 plus years.
You're probably targeting law enforcement, and the ticket size for your product, I must guess, must be around from 10,000 to 100,000 to buy your product.
Yeah, our system, the initial cost for our systems are around 50,000, and the per sample cost and the maintenance and everything, most agencies are around 3,000 to 5,000 a year. So once they actually have that capital investment and they own the system, then from there the maintenance and the use is really pretty reasonable. So the and there's lots of grants. We have an entire page on our website that's dedicated to grants. So if agencies have trouble, putting that into an actual budget line item, then finding a grant is pretty easy. It's pretty easy. There's Coverdale. I mean, there's so many grants out there that the federal government provides, especially the DOJ, that lots of agencies are using those grants to purchase our system.
How do you sell to law enforcement agencies? I do outreach on my side, and it must be a bit more complicated than sending a cold email or a LinkedIn outreach or even doing a call. Is the sales cycle longer? And how do you sell to these folks?
Yeah. We found that our sales cycle is about a year and a half. There's various things that we can do, and we've been trying to do to shorten that. But if you look at the initial contact with the customer and then educating the customer, and then most of the time, say we meet like a CSI at a conference or something, and then we'll send them some follow-on information, and then they have to forward that up to like their sergeant, and then it goes up the chain of command. So the desire may be there to get the system. They may have cases that they'll send like to a private lab that owns an M-Vac. And so, there's more and more agencies and personnel in law enforcement that know about our system, but acquiring it can take a long time. It's just one of those where once they actually they want the system, they understand the benefits of it, then it's a matter of the procurement. And so, like I said, sometimes they can get a grant, but the grants are the applications, sorry, are like once a year. And so if they miss that deadline, then they have to wait till the next year to apply for it. So there's and that's if they have a decent grant writer. So there's also, you know, putting a $50,000 budget, you know, into a line item into the budget a lot of times isn't really difficult, because, you know, some of these agencies have budgets that are hundreds of millions, if not billions, you know, and the really big ones. But so, you know, 50,000, that's less than what a cruiser costs. So, you know, every time you watch Cops or something like that, if you see them do like a pit maneuver or something, or they wreck a car, you know, that's like $75,000 to $100,000 just right there. So it's just, it can go really fast as far as expensive. But what the M-Vac will do for them is, number one, it's a durable item, and it'll last them a lot of years. But you solve one case with it and it pays for itself. It's some of these cases, like that one that I was talking about in South Florida, you know, that case was cold for 40 years. So, you know, you think about what kind of damage that caused psychologically to not only the families, but also just the community. The community knew that there was a murderer that was capable of killing two young 14-year-old girls walking the streets for 40 years. So you think about what does that do to a community? You know, it's there's worse things than just a high ticket item, you know, spending that kind of money. You've got to solve these crimes, just if nothing else, just to get it off the books, and then your community kind of relaxes. There's that big, you know, oh man, you know, we got it. You know, you can be excited about solving the case and finally getting justice for the victim, but there's also that big relief into the community, because you've got to again, some guy that's capable of killing two 14-year-old girls in a horrible way. You got that guy off the streets. That's big time.
And I just see AI and data and satellite images, the capability to solve crime. You know, in my opinion, everyone should have very few privacy. Well, in my opinion, right? And AI should be in charge of fetching the data, you know, not humans, not so that I can look at pictures of you in your bedroom changing, but like AI should be in charge of looking at data and making potential conclusions. I mean, satellite images weren't developed in that time, nor was AI. But I would certainly see the capacity of AI to just, you know, pull out satellite images of this white van going to the Everglades and just catching the man. Because yes, you're right. Like the damages it does to communities is just terrible.
Yeah. Well, there's most cold cases are, again, they're cold because when the crimes were actually committed, you know, AI didn't even exist. Little, you know, most of the times computers didn't exist. So, you know, you think about you can't really look at them from the time frame of where we're currently at with technology. You have to look back even in the 90s and the early 2000s. You know, DNA was just coming onto the scene. So a lot of the cases that we're helping solve are from back then, and they didn't have the capabilities that they have now. So a lot of agencies are looking at their cold cases and saying, you know, when was this evidence last looked at? How was it tested? You know, what was the sensitivity of the testing when it actually happened? And yeah, it's totally different now. So anything that hasn't been tested in really like the last 5 years should be retested, because the sensitivities of even the lab equipment, and the ability, you know, the electrophoresis, everything is so much more advanced now than it was even 5 years ago, that it's almost like it's a completely different capability.
Right. And I can also think that these cases must be diminishing nowadays. I mean, guys, I think, are just more horny than before with like porn and all of that, and the cases of, like rape porn and stuff like that. But I think people have their cell phone, and if you film someone's faces, it goes instantly in the cloud, right? So as a self-defense mechanism, that should reduce crime and rape. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't think guys are any more horny than they were 100 years ago. I just think it's society is just different now, and a lot of things are accepted now than they were even 20 years ago. So, the hookup culture, I think, is so detrimental to society and in general. It just, I think it makes us ripe for, it desensitizes us in one direction, and just makes things just ripe for problems. But despite that, as far as being able to solve cases, yeah, like you said, you brought up your cell phone. Your ability, the police's ability to track using GPS and everything, track where a phone is at any particular time. Once they get a warrant and they're able to actually access that phone's pinging ability. It's pinging off towers. They can triangulate that. They can tell basically exactly where you are. So, and that's just one area that they can look at. You look at that plus DNA plus, like you said, emails and text messages and, all the things that we do with technology nowadays that it tracks us. Your search history on Google and all sorts of things. All of that can come together and be clues into the investigation, and it enables the investigators to really create a story a lot quicker than they used to be able to. So, I think like the day of the serial killer is really gone, because people just can't get away with things that they used to.
Right. And that's quite a victory for society, because a lot of folks, they think that everything's getting worse nowadays, but I'd argue against that. I mean, we just said that, yeah, the hookup culture, yeah, definitely has gone worse, but I think crime generally throughout the world is going down. Last question for you, because I know we're out of time already, but the podcast, what were your objectives with the pods, and what have you accomplished so far with it?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. The podcast is called All Things Crime, and I really started it because of COVID. When we were in lockdown, I was sitting around saying, well, I can't go to conferences. I can't go do trainings. I can't really interact. There's only so many emails you can send out. And so I wanted to create some content, some evergreen content that would get out there and still be able to tell our story. So I started the podcast initially just for like LinkedIn, be able to create clips and things like that of content. And then somebody just said, well, why don't you just park the whole interview? Like if I'm interviewing a homicide detective, guys that I'd known before COVID, then I started parking it on YouTube, and then we stripped the audio out of it and created a podcast out of it. So I had to change the format a little bit over time, but as a whole, my goal is just to educate people on really what the investigative process is. So, how many people watch CSI and think that that's real? They think that, you can actually solve a case in 45 minutes, and, it's just impossible. There's so much more that goes into it. And so I like to explore that. I like to interview CSIs that, how do they actually investigate a crime scene? How does a detective put the story together? And also, how does the M-Vac fit into that? How do other technologies fit into solving cases? And that's really what the podcast is all about. Of course, we'll explore different cases. We've gone into that Idaho quadruple murder at the University of Idaho. My dad went there. I lived up in that town for 10 years. So that was interesting. But, there's all sorts of cases that we'll explore and find out why even investigate or interviewing a criminal psychologist and say, hey, why do you think this guy did this? What would inspire some guy, or not inspire, but motivate some guy to flip out and walk into some college co-ed's home and murder 4 people. And so getting into why they do that kind of thing, those are all things that that we like to explore on our podcast.
Thanks for being here today, Jared, and sharing the wisdom. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, you can go to www.m-vac.com, or our podcast is on YouTube. It's on Spotify, All Things Crime. So yeah, LinkedIn, you can find me there.